Spotlight, Setting the Company Compass. We're glad you decided to join us for today's webinar. My name is Steve Smith, and I'm Brivia's Vice President of Market Development. If you had a chance to join us in our most recent webinar, it was led by our president, Stephen DeGroot. You'll know that we believe there's a lot of untapped potential in a company's compass. In today's session, we're going to actually go over the how do you build that compass, and we're going to give you guidance and best practices based on our experience. The webinar today will be about 45 minutes long, which gives us plenty of time for questions and interaction. And if this is your first Brivia webinar, you'll know, or well, I want you to know that we love interaction with our audience. So encourage you to use the chat button as well as the Q&A queue if you prefer to send a private message. And I'll give you a chance to start using the chat here right away. I'm joining today's webinar from my home office in Airdrie, Alberta, Canada, which is just north of Calgary. And why don't you let us know where you're joining us from in the chat here. So while you're doing that, I want to bring in today's speaker, who is Brivia's Vice President of Operations, Chris Downey. Chris, welcome to the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Thank you.
And you're joining from today?
I am joining from Winnipeg, my basement, my home office, my basement office here in Winnipeg, where it is a beautiful, beautiful day, and good to see folks from Calgary, from Winnipeg. Awesome. I'm excited to be here, and thank you so much, Steve. As Steve mentioned, we're here to talk about setting your organizational compass. For those of you that joined us last month, pardon me, our president, Steve, talked about the importance of having a functioning organizational compass and the impact that can have. And today, I want to talk to you about how to set it in a meaningful way. Now, I'm here to also let you know that if you didn't participate last month, that's fine. You're not going to be behind at all. I will be covering the highlights of what Steve talked about last month, so you won't be behind. Also, we will be following the session, we're going to be handing out a PDF workbook for you to be able to take away some of these learnings and apply them in your organizations as well. So don't feel too rushed to be taking notes here. We'll share all of this information with you as well. And as Steve mentioned, let's keep the chat going, and good to see folks joining us from Ontario, Manitoba, Calgary's not a province, Alberta as well. Awesome. Great to see you folks. Okay, before we get into this, I want to ask you a question, and you can keep this going in the chat as well. Have you ever found yourself on maybe you're driving, maybe you're driving home from work, and all of a sudden you just kind of phase out, and you don't even realize where you are or even how you got there? Can anyone relate to that experience where you just kind of zone out, and all of a sudden you're like, where am I? How did I even get here? Right? Most of us have had that experience at one point in time or another, and it can be very unsettling, especially when you're driving, this idea of being lost and how did I get there? And now, being lost every now and again is not such a bad thing, but we can't be lost for too long, because not such good things happen, particularly if we're on the highway. But if we're on the road, we're lost and we're not sure where we are, it can be unsettling. But then all of a sudden, we see, whether it's a street sign or it's a landmark or a familiar sight, and then in that moment, we're brought back. We know where we are. We feel comfortably, and okay, I know where I'm at. I'm on my way home from work. The next turn off is my neighborhood, and we start to relax again. Right? It's that familiar sight that snaps us back into play. And as I mentioned, being lost for short periods of time is okay, but we as humans, we can't be lost for too long. It's not in our best interest. And of course, when we're driving, we absolutely don't want to be lost and unclear about where we're going. Now, so most of us have had that experience, whether we're out in a vehicle or just out on the road. But have you ever had that experience while at work? Have you ever found yourself to be a little bit lost, a little bit uncertain, and just not sure what you're doing? Maybe you were unclear about what you were doing there that day, or maybe you were unclear on what was expected of you. Perhaps feeling a bit disconnected from the people you work with every day, or the work itself, right? What are we here to do? Or uninspired. And I'm seeing from Darcy here that, yeah, wandering mind, we can get lost sometimes just in our thoughts. It's amazing how that can do it. And that can happen to us at work. And sometimes at work, we can get lost as well. And most of us have experienced this, some for short periods, some for more extended periods. But just like when we're on the road and we're not sure what we're doing, it's very unsettling at work. Now, when you do experience this, what reference point do you use to bring you back? How do you get snapped back into that comfort zone? Something that helps make us more clear, helps reconnect us, or helps inspire us. See, we believe that a well-functioning compass, organizational compass, serves as just that reference point, or even that guidance system, if you will, to help keep us on track, for one, ideally, but even when we do start to veer off a little bit, it's our guidance system that can get us back in to where we need to be and heading back down that path, right? So when we become unclear, our compass can give us that clarity we need. If we feel disconnected, the compass can help us reconnect, right? So important. So this is what we believe the function that an organizational compass can serve. So when I talk about this, what we mean by this is an organizational compass. This operates, or can operate when it's set well, as the primary mechanism both for leadership as well as organizational wide alignment. And once it's set in a meaningful way, this can be used to ensure that all staff are both clear on the direction of the organization, but also how we need to operate to get there. So as I mentioned, it can operate as our guidance system. So when I say compass, of course, folks naturally think of northeast, southwest, or whatever you use to remind yourself of the points of the compass. When we talk about an organizational compass, what we're talking about here, we're talking about our vision, our values, our mission, and our strategy. These are the points that we consider to be the organizational compass. And your compass, we believe, right smack in the center of this compass, is really your purpose, your reason, right? Your compass, done well, defines who you are. It's your identity as an organization, right? It helps us with decision making. It helps us determine who should we hire, who should we fire, what behaviors do we recognize, which behaviors do we celebrate. When people behave out of step or engage out of step with our compass, how do we engage to get things back online? As I mentioned, done well, your compass is your identity. You know, it's interesting. I was actually thinking about this last night. My wife and I were having a conversation. We have a 10-year-old daughter. We're just talking about, well, we're talking about just the wonders of growing up, but we were actually talking about identity. And at a young age, often we don't even know what we aren't connected with our identity. And that can be a bit unsettling. And we, unfortunately, we don't necessarily have a guide to figure that one out. Within our organization, of course, organization is made up of human beings, but our compass actually can define what our identity as a collective is. And wouldn't that be great if we could have a bit of a guide to help us with our identity? Of course, we don't have that luxury in life, and that's one of the beautiful things to life, is figuring that out. But within an organization with intention, we can be very clear about our identity as an organization, and that's the function that a compass can operate for us, can actually help people get clear, have the direction that they need, and do all sorts of things that humans need. So that's when we say compass, that's what we're talking about: vision, values, mission, strategy. And right at the heart of that is your purpose. Theoretically sounds pretty good, Chris, but the question becomes now, how do you build it? How do you build your compass in a way that it does all of those great things that I'm talking about? Because that's usually the miss. I think conceptually everyone can line up with this idea. This compass is a good guide. It's going to keep us on the road or help us navigate the turbulent waters, and that's all good. But how do we build it in a way that's meaningful? Well, there's 4 points to the compass, and there's lots that goes into it. And we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. A compass really provides 2 key pieces, and or needs to provide two key pieces if it's functioning well. And what's interesting actually about these two key things that the compass provides or can provide, they're two fundamental needs that we as humans have to do our best and operate at our best. Right? So there's two things that a compass needs to provide. First is connection. Connection to the work, to your vision, to how you're making the world a better place. Connection to each other and the work and alignment around the work that we're carrying out. But it's more than that. It's more than just connection. We also need to ensure that we provide direction and clarity around where we're going and how we're going to get there. Right? So a well-set compass provides both connection as well as direction for individuals and organization-wide. For those, and I see lots of familiar names in our attendance list here, for those that have participated in previous webinars or even some of previous programs, you've heard us talk about the keys to optimal human functioning. Humans, to do our best and be at our best, we need to feel those three great states: safe, significant, and situated. How you feel safe, significant, and situated first starts with being connected, being connected, knowing you're adding value, that you're making a difference, but also being clear, that situatedness on what we're doing and how we're going to go about doing it. And a compass provides those two pieces, that when we're clear on what we're there to do and we're feeling connected in a meaningful way, it actually creates a sense of safety. So these are a conduit to those three great states that many of you have heard us talk about. So a well-set compass will provide those two key pieces. So what I'd like to now do is dive in to each section of the compass. And I see, Steve, you've come off, your camera has come off.
Yeah, Chris, there's maybe before we dive into there's a question that came into the Q&A queue. Basically, I'm a manager of a department and my organization doesn't have a compass. How can I apply this?
Yeah, that's a good
question. Be a good time to ask that.
Yeah, you know what, Steve, thanks for intervening with that, and thank you for the participants' question. It's a great question. My bet is there are some folks online right now that probably are that. Maybe you're in a middle management position, you're working for an organization, maybe even a government entity, and you might not have there might not be a compass. That's okay. And there is hope within what we're going to be moving into here. What I'm going to, as we break into the compass, this can apply at a divisional level. This can apply at a departmental level, and this can apply at a team level. So what we're going to break into here, you can do at a team level. If you are responsible for a team, you can set a compass within your team, within your department, within your division, whatever your sphere of influence is. The only caveat I want to add to that, and I'll circle back to this at the end, is we want to make sure that whatever we develop within our teams is aligned with the direction of the organization. So while a lot of organizations may not have a fully set compass, there are often aspects of a compass that are in play. We want to make sure we recognize what those are. And if we develop something for our division or our department, it is aligned. Because the last thing we want to do is have a bunch of different compasses going off in different directions. But great question. What we're going to break into can be applied in, maybe you're a branch within government, by all means, this applies. Maybe you're in health, which of course is a large institution in our province, in our country. You can do this within your sphere of influence, as long as it's aligned to the bigger vision. So I'm going to circle back, but a great question, Steve. I appreciate you for chiming in on that. So as I mentioned, a functioning compass creates those two things: connection as well as direction. So let's dive in. Let's go into each one of these in a little bit more detail. So think of what I'm going to put up here as a checklist. And as I mentioned, this is all in the handout that you'll be able to use. But think of this as a checklist. So if you're looking at a compass, maybe that's already set, does your compass align with what we're saying here? If maybe you don't have a compass and you're crafting a vision with your group, with your team, with your organization, use this as a guide. So first and foremost, a vision, it must inspire. If people are going to connect with it in a meaningful way, it needs to inspire us. And this is where this is dreamlike. We want to be lofty with our vision. It's connected to our purpose, right? It's dreamlike. This describes where your company wants to go, and more importantly, what it hopes to accomplish. So what's the future that we that we see? Oftentimes, we're envisioning a future that doesn't even exist yet, because it's the work that we do with the people we do it with that's going to bring that future to reality, right? It focuses on a future because of the work that you do, and it's about greatest possibilities. I will say this: it needs to inspire, and it needs to inspire you and the people that make up your organization. Your vision is not a marketing exercise. And if we're thinking about it as a starting point, we're missing the boat. It needs to hold meaning for those within the organization. It needs to inspire those within the organization. We can use it to inform our marketing, but this is not a marketing exercise. This is about inspiring our organization. And I will say this: if your vision does not tell you how you are making the world a better place, then it needs a little bit more work, and we can do better with that. So it's about those better percent. It must be inspiring, and it answers some very important questions for us. Answers some very important questions for us, right? Questions like, why are we all here? And what is it that we're working towards? See, early in my career, I worked for an organization here in Winnipeg. It was a pharmaceutical company called Cangene Corporation, and it was a biopharmaceutical company, in fact. And what we didn't have at the time, a clear vision. Cangene's flagship product was a product called Winrow, and Winrow's primary indication was to prevent hemolytic disease in the newborn. So simply put, we were saving unborn babies. That was something pretty easy for me to get behind, and that was a vision that was very, very clear to me. And so when I had moments where I was a little bit tired and I maybe wanted to cut a corner and I didn't want to take that extra step, I connected with that vision, and that's all I needed to get back up and make sure that I did that task the way it needed to be. And I worked in almost every division of that organization, and that vision inspired me. And as a small aside, I want to highlight something. That product was developed in Winnipeg, in Manitoba. Manitoba, we have a bit of a complex. We don't brag about ourselves a whole lot, but we don't talk about our innovation. But up until 1981, there was no treatment for this in the world. And two doctors, Doctors Bowman and Chown, developed that here in Winnipeg. And I think it is a great success story, not only just for Winnipeg, but for Canada. So I just want to shout out to Manitobans and Canadian innovators for sure. But a vision can help pick us up and motivate us to go that extra mile. At Brivia, our vision is to make work and life meaningful for everyone. So when we're doing client work and we're tired, is this our best effort? Is this going to make work more meaningful for the people we're serving? And if we come up short, no, I need to do more. I need to do better. And a vision can inspire us to do more. It can actually draw from deep within. Now, our mission, now this must inform. So where our vision is a connection piece, our mission is a direction piece, and it must inform us on some important things. It answers questions like, how do we intend on accomplishing the vision? Because it's one thing to have that lofty vision, right? It's one thing to have that lofty vision to make work and life meaningful for everyone. How do we do that? What is it we do to answer that? Because if that's all we did, we wouldn't be accomplishing much. So how are we going to get there? This becomes the doing piece, right? It becomes the doing piece, and it informs who you are, what you do, who you do it for, and how you do it. This describes the type of work you do, the clients that you serve, your level of service, the support that you provide. And there's 5 questions. So when I'm talking about a checklist here, let's think about this as a bit of a checklist. There's 5 questions that a well-written mission statement can answer. And those are quite simple, but who are we? What do we do? How do we do it? Why do we do it? And what value do we bring? Right. So with us at Brivia, we're very clear about wanting to make work and life meaningful for everyone. But again, that's dreamlike and that's lofty. We understand the impact that would have on the world. Wouldn't that be a great world if people experienced meaning and meaningfulness in their lives, right? So that answers that question. We're connected with that. But what is it that we do? Well, we focus on leadership, right? And we empower organizations to connect with meaning and optimize performance and create healthy cultures, right? So the mission gets very, very informative around who you are and what you do. Now, one of the questions that comes up, and I'm wondering if Steve maybe even has this one already, is there a point in the compass that's more important than any point? And I'm going to say there isn't, because you need all 4 points in order to navigate successfully. If anyone has ever tried navigating with a broken compass, it doesn't work well. So while they are all important, everything rises, and we choose the Eastern point for values, not by accident, but because everything rises from that. And our values must invoke this sense of responsibility, and they answer important questions like, how do we behave? Why do we behave in this way? Right? We talk about our identity. This is who we are. How and what this becomes the how and the what of the mission or the business strategy, right? So this becomes how we're going to operate, how we're going to behave, how we're going to interact. This becomes your behavioral guide, your actions, your interactions, both with your employees and outside of the organization. So when you're walking out your strategy towards your preferred results, whatever those might be, this becomes the rules in which we operate. Because we've all seen, at very least, and many of us have been part of organizations where you've got a crystal clear strategy and you know what the results are. But there are no guiding principles around how we achieve those results. And that's when people are knocking each other down and leaving bodies in the wake. And that's a big, big risk. I know, actually, most of us in the organization have worked in organizations like that before. And values are at the heart of great culture. And if our values can't be named, they cannot be claimed. And this is really key. I talk about the importance, everything rises from that. The values are at the heart of your organizational culture. There's lots of discussion about culture these days. You can read all sorts of write-ups about it, and everyone's talking about the importance of culture. And it for good reason, because it matters. And we have a culture. The moment you have human beings coming together, culture exists. I mean, those of us that are on the webinar today, we're creating a microculture. How are we engaging with each other? How are we interacting? The moment humans come together, you have culture. It starts to create, and it will grow organically over time. Now, the thing with that is, if you leave it to chance, you might create a really healthy and productive culture. But do you really want to leave that to chance? Right? Because just like there's healthy cultures, there's also unhealthy culture. And unhealthy culture is the stuff that can take us out. Healthy culture, on the other hand, that's where we're not only productive and we achieve things, we get things done, but people also do well in the process. And healthy cultures, whether we're talking about organizational cultures or societal cultures, there's 2 key elements that are required for a healthy culture. And that's first, a common language, and secondly, values that are known and understood. Now, within organizations, when I say common language, I'm not talking about French or English or Cree or Ojibwe. I'm talking about how we engage with each other, how we make decisions, how we work through conflict. That's the language I'm talking about. And those values are our shared understanding on how we're going to behave. So healthy organizational cultures have these 2 elements. When organizational cultures are struggling, those things are often absent. We can step outside of business just for a moment. Look at our society. There are some cultures that are really struggling and that are desperately trying to get back to a healthy state. And what are they doing? Trying to reclaim language that was taken from them and aligning on values that were important, right? The reason this carries so much weight is we're values-based creatures. We're driven by it. So let's bring this back into our organizations. If we aren't clear on our values and we don't share a language, we are on rocky ground. And the values are a critical point to our connection. And lastly, our strategy. This must instruct. So it's great to have this vision. It's great to have these amazing values and this mission we're passionate about. But how are we going to bring this all together? And our strategy does just that. It tells us what priorities align with the vision and the values and drive the mission. How many times have people worked for an organization where there was a vision and our strategy doesn't even align with it? Not only is that confusing, it's actually off-putting for our employees and for our organizations. It's what's most important. What are our most important objectives? Where should we place our time, our energy, and our resources, right? Who's responsible? And how will we know if we are successful? These are things that our strategy can answer. Now, I want to be clear about this. A strategy is, there's lots that goes into a strategy. I'm not suggesting everyone should know every aspect of your organizational strategy, but your organization needs to have a strategic focus that people are aligned around. Because when you don't, we're running in multiple directions and it can get very, very confusing. And full transparency at Brivia, this is something that we often come back to make sure we stay focused. Because in our desire to help everyone, there are times where we can deviate from our strategy and we need to reconnect around that, because if we're spread too thin, then we're not helping anyone. So the strategy almost operates as an anchor to keep you grounded in what needs to happen, by when, and who's going to do that. So although you don't need to, not everyone in the organization needs to know your entire strategy, the strategic focus of the organization is key. So ideally, these things are all brought together and we want to be able to present it in a succinct way. So this slide, this is actually part of the workbook that we'll be sharing with you. You want to be able to boil it down so it can be read, it could be understood on one page. Like I said, there are lots of contributing components to this, and we can you can have a book on your compass, but your compass needs to be known, it needs to be understood, and you want to be able to get it down to one page. So we actually are providing this for you in a takeaway for you to be able to take your groups through. Now, Chris, this sounds like a lot of good theory, and it sounds great, but where do we start? Right? That's usually the question. It's not onboarding people to this idea is pretty easy, but it becomes, where do we start if we want to build a compass? Whether we are starting a new organization, right? Maybe we're part of a startup, or maybe we're part of an existing organization that is reestablishing something, or maybe you've just taken on a new division within a large entity. Where do you start? There's a few things to do to begin with. And the first is revisit what you have. This goes back to that question that was asked a little bit earlier. If you're looking in a department or a division, take a look at what's already in play. In your organization, most organizations have aspects of the compass already in place, some formally, some informally, but find out what's there. And also find out what is there but isn't necessarily spoken about. I mentioned culture before, right? Well, culture, it's the tacit social order of things. So the unspoken things that operate, how people talk to each other, how they engage. Your culture gives you signs about what's important to your organization. So you can even look to that, but revisit what's already in play, right? Because there are aspects that are in play. And when you do, reboot what's still working for you. If you have values that have been called out that are important, and maybe they're collecting dust in that boardroom, let's pull them out, let's dust them off. Do they still apply today? And if they do, let's put them back into play. Let's give them meaning again. And in fact, I will say this, if you have values collecting dust in your boardroom and we're not living them, and we're not going to do anything with them, we're better just to get rid of them altogether, because it's actually, values incongruence is one of the biggest killers of morale right now, when an organization says one thing and people experience something else. So revisit what's already in place, reboot what still makes sense today. And you're going to uncover some things that aren't working for you, and that's fine. Then rebuild the components that might be broken, or rebuild or start over if you need to. But waiting and sitting isn't an option. We can pull these pieces. And the interesting thing is, and we go in and help organizations build compasses all the time, and we love to do the work, and we love to do the work with you as well. But you might not have budget for that, and that's okay. You can do this. You don't need a line item in the budget to at least start with this and get a compass that holds the meaning. So revisit what's there, reboot what's in place, and then rebuild what you need to. Now, going a little bit deeper here, there's some critical steps that I want to highlight here, that these are things we don't want to miss. So while we're revisiting, while we're rebooting, while we're rebuilding, the first thing we need to do is involve staff. Far too often, organizational compasses are set or in a boardroom and they're created in a vacuum. And then they're just bestowed on an organization, right? And sadly, sometimes people hear about their vision and their values in an outward marketing message. If it's going to hold meaning for your employees, they need to see themselves in it. So we want to involve staff. That is one of the fundamental steps that we take when we enter into a compass setting engagement. What is the plan to involve staff? And we have done this with organizations of 100, and we've done this with organizations of thousands. And we survey the staff, we find out what's important to them. Why? Because once this is built and set, we need them to own it and speak to it as if they said it, because they really did. So involve staff, confirm relevance. It's one thing to create this great dreamlike, vision and a clear mission, or we feel really good about it, but is it relevant? So we want to confirm relevance. So let's take it to the production floor. Let's take it to our operations, right? Is this relevant to the work that we do? So we need to involve staff. We need to confirm relevance, so it's holding meaning. When we launch these things, we want to launch it with energy. This is something to be proud of, something to celebrate. So launch your compass with energy and celebrate often. Okay, when I say celebrate, not just celebrate the launch, because a compass is not a passive resource to you. It's intended to be dynamic. So when we see people living values, taking steps towards carrying out our mission or bringing people closer to that vision, celebrate that. Even when maybe somebody steps out of line a little bit around what we're all about, but then through conversation, through that common language, gets back on track. Let's celebrate that. That's something to celebrate. That's our compass functioning. That's our identity coming to life, right? And revisit the compass. As I mentioned, this is not intended to be passive. This is dynamic. And we want to, when we are creating our strategy, let's look at our vision, our mission, our values. When we're considering a shift in direction, maybe we want to take on a new product. How does this align with our vision? This will help us make those decisions. So revisit in meetings, in planning sessions, revisit it often, right? We don't want this to end up collecting dust in the office. Now, one of the things that's very important, a compass that is known and understood is an incredibly powerful tool, but it's only a tool, and it requires us as the members of the organization, the leaders and the employees alike, to give it the energy that it needs. So when a compass is set well, when you have a dreamlike vision, when you have a mission that helps provide direction around who you are and what it is you do, you have values that are known and understood, and you've got an instructional, strategic focus set, that compass is going to provide first the connection that we all need as humans. And it's going to provide the direction that we need to do and be well, right? And when those two pieces come together, what's amazing is that actually creates a sense of protection, a sense of safety, right? It can create the conditions for those three great states that are so important for us as humans to be successful, right? They provide that guide for us, that reference point, that when we're lost brings us back. I will say this, through the pandemic, some organizations did very, very well. And I don't mean very, very well financially. Maybe they did or they didn't. I'm not right. What I'm saying here isn't about financial performance, although one would argue it probably would lead to positive performance. Some organizations, employees did very, very well through the pandemic when their organizational compass was set, because employees were dealing with uncertainty outside of work. What work created for them was an opportunity where they felt connected, where they felt clear on what they were to do, and as a result, felt protected and safe, even just in the 8 hours that they were there. and help them deal with the stresses of life. And one of the things I'll highlight, some of the organizations I'm thinking of in mind were widely distributed. But because they were clear on who they were and what they were all about, they were able to create that. So even in the throes of a pandemic, the campus can keep us feeling safe. And it's going to keep us on the road, right? That's it. It's going to keep us in the zone, so we're not drifting. So we're not, or if we do drift, because we're humans, we're going to be gently tapped back into play, as opposed to, it's like that guidance system, and many of our cars have that now. When we start to drift off, it's going to beep at us to get us back on. That's what a compass can do, and can set us up for great success. So I'm hoping that there was some value there for you. I know I was doing a lot of talking, and I know there's some questions that likely came up, but I will say that everything I talked about, we'll be sharing a PDF, a workbook for you to work through. But I'll pause here and check in. Steve, any questions that came in throughout our time together?
Well, Chris, some questions came in definitely, and I'm going to encourage the audience to continue with that. But maybe you can share an example of a customer we worked with to help them with their compass. That might be valuable here.
Yeah, that's a great question. Great reference. I'm trying to think of a few here. Yeah, one does come to mind, and I'm looking at some of our participants here, probably most relevant. We did continue to do some work with a human services organization in Ontario, and what had happened here, a new CEO had come into the organization, and the organization, as often the case in human service, a lot of very well-meaning individuals working and doing lots of things, but I would say disjointed, disconnected is probably the best word to describe where this agency was at the time. And the CEO recognized this and wanted to put some structures in place and provide some clarity around their strategy. That's where that started. But they recognized that there really wasn't a clear identity as an organization. And through some references, we're connected with us at Brivia, and we went in and spent time starting with the senior leadership team, but eventually rolling out to the entire organization. And we took them through a compass setting exercise, following the principles we talked about today, and helped them get clear on their vision, on their mission, on their values. And they applied that as they set their strategy. And everything they do as a result of that is rooted in this compass, and it guides their decisions. It guides the strategic directions that they take. And what's amazing, and I'm thinking that was probably about 18 months ago, this organization has gotten more clear on what it does, and then the employees are doing better. And I could say that with complete accuracy, is one of the things that we've done with this organization is we've actually helped them. We run our M3 employee experience measurement tool, and once they launched their survey, they actually ran the M3, and they've run it since, and we're seeing an increase on all aspects of the meaning domains that we measure. So they're more clear on what's being done, they're more productive, and people are doing better. And it all goes back to two things: one, having a compass that's meaningful, and having a leadership team that takes ownership for it and puts it into practice.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, that's great. Chris, there was one question that came in. Based on our experience, is there a point on the compass that customers do really well on, and they seems to get it right away, or is there a point on the compass that they struggle on that we've noticed in our experience?
Yeah, well, yes is the answer to that, and it's all of them in various points. Some organizations are the vision thing, they just get right away, and they're on it, and then struggle with that kind of what we do find. Some organizations get the connection really well and aren't so clear on the direction, or others are very clear on direction, right, the strategy, and then the mission, and then struggle a little bit with the vision. So we see a little bit of everything, but what we've definitely seen the most of is a lot of effort, and for good reason, that goes into strategy, because that's the work plan, and it's the goals and the objectives, and there's a lot of organizations that do that really well. But when they're missing those other 3 points, it puts them at risk, as I mentioned. I think maybe I didn't, but that having a clear strategy is very important. But if we don't have the parameters around how we need to behave to carry that strategy out, then we're going to be putting our organization at risk. And then we can't sustainably achieve results. And that's what we're striving for. So organizations struggle with both. It depends on the organization. But I find often they're high connection organizations or high direction organizations. So in some cases, we're just bringing one over to the next. But I will say this, Steve, that as I mentioned human services, I even mentioned my time in pharma. We need to be cautious that we know what we're here to do because we're saving everybody. Because often when people go into human services, when they go into health, well, they're there for, there's a calling that brought them there. They're often there to help, to serve. But what got us there is all different. And so sometimes we don't worry about vision. We're all clear on what it is that we do. What's amazing is once we start asking those organizations, maybe we're not quite as clear as we thought we were. So it takes, for those who've heard Steve talk before, he said that the saying, go slow to go fast. For those that when we're making those assumptions, you know what we say about assumptions, right? So let's stop, let's make sure we're clear. So yeah, that answered your question.
Okay, right? No, that's good. We had a question come in about mission, specifically to those 5 questions that you need to ask. How do we handle, or how do you handle disagreement amongst the team? Because I imagine those 5 questions, there's some disagreement when we're working with teams, helping them put together their compass.
Yeah, well, see, so when we're going through a compass setting exercise, when we're first starting out, even before we start to set some ground rules, we start to connect on values, understand a little bit about what's important to the organization. So when we get into the discussion about mission, and there is disagreement for sure, right? Who are we? What do we do? And there it starts to become, we go back to some of those other points to help frame up. How does this lead to a better world? So when I'm giving away a little bit of our secret sauce here, but when we are going through a formal compass setting exercise, we start high, we start with visioning. It's almost like a V, and then we move into mission and strategy, and then we move into values. So we leave it pretty loose, and we just have good conversation. We understand what's important. But then when we come back in, we go back at values and get crystal clear on those, and then walk it back out, values to mission and strategy to vision. And what we find when we can look back at our mission through the lens of our values, it starts to become a lot more clear. And while there might be times we might not fully agree, the values help explain why we're going this direction. And that's a close second to full agreement.
Okay. One last question, actually, we probably have time for, just around the values. Like you had mentioned in the beginning that you can use your compass to inform your hiring, perhaps even your firing. It seems like values is the most natural way to do that. But how can you use the other parts of the vision, like strategy, to inform the hiring and firing?
Yes, well, so the values, absolutely. That this comes down to this fundamental. This is the thing that when we're running into an issue with people, that's when we tend to say they aren't a good fit, right? It's afterwards. We want to connect this at the beginning because it's a convenient thing to say this wasn't a good fit, but at the front end is really our opportunity. Is there a values alignment around the work that we do? Now, the other points that come is how they become important is what's our strategy? What are we trying to accomplish? Are we bringing in the right resources, the right skills, the right knowledge? Because don't get me wrong, it's great to bring people that are aligned, but if it's not the right skill set, then we can't walk that out. So the mission and the strategy plays a very close role. Values and vision are important around the alignment, but who do we actually need? What do they need to be able to bring to the table? Because don't get me wrong, this is about creating conditions for people to do well and be well at work. Yeah, but it's just as much about achieving results, right? This is not a mutually exclusive thing. So the mission and strategy helps inform more of the hard stuff. What skills do we need to be bringing in? Yeah,
sure. Well, that makes sense. That's great. Yep. Well, that's all we had for questions, and we're running out of time here. Chris, thank you. Awesome webinar as usual. I'm sure there's a lot of information people can apply here. And folks that are still with us, you can download this booklet that Chris talked about just by taking a picture with your phone of the QR code. We'll also send you a link to that as we follow up with you. And I just wanted to mention this is the final webinar in our series. We're going to take a break for the summer, guys. I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel like it's the first normal summer we get to experience in a couple of years. But we'll be back in September with a new webinar series, relevant topics, and really focusing in on our areas of expertise, which, as Chris mentioned, is leadership, culture, and engagement. So in the meantime, feel free to reach out at any time. We'd love to continue conversations with you folks. You can visit our LinkedIn website or web page on LinkedIn, or reach out, contact@briviaconsulting.com. And on behalf of Brivia, I want to thank you for joining us today, and have a great summer. We look forward to seeing you all in the fall.